Hi, my name is Travis Kelly. I'm the Well Construction Compliance Coordinator with the Oregon Water Resources Department. This is part one of a two-part series regarding well construction administrative rules and statutes, specifically covering water supply wells. If any questions or concerns come up as a result of this presentation, please feel free to call, text, or email me anytime. Today's presentation is really going to focus on water supply wells, and we're going to be looking at Oregon Administrative Rule 690 through 690-230. The beginning of this presentation is going to focus on how do we find rules and appendices and utilize that understanding to find answers to questions that may arise during the exam or during well construction. I'm going to focus on Oregon Administrative Rule OAR 690-200 through 230, referring to general standards and definitions, water well construction standards, maintenance, repair, and deepening, abandonment, enforcement, and low temperature geothermal wells. The best part or way to start this process is becoming familiar with where we keep the OARs. I highly recommend that everyone become familiar with our website, specifically the resources for well constructors. The link at the top of this page will bring you to the resources for well constructors page. And on the right-hand side of this page, you will see access to all of the applicable OARs for water well construction or other type of well construction and the applicable appendices. Additionally, the applicable Oregon revised statutes are listed for water wells and for monitoring wells there. On the left-hand side of this page, you'll see other useful links for well constructors, including licensing, how to file e-file start cards, and access to other forms such as well report forms. In addition to the administrative rules and appendices, or in the appendices for those administrative rules, you will find various tables. The table that I find is very helpful when not knowing what standard applies to a type of situation is table 200-1. This table, shown at the bottom of the screen, lists common descriptions of borings, and then in the column to the right, you see the standard that applies to that. So an example is a dewatering well. You'll say, I don't know what that applies. You'll see it falls under water well. So those are the applicable rules that govern the construction standards for a dewatering well within the water well standards. Additionally, it's really good to become familiar with the various chapters within OAR 690 and what they govern. So you'll see that water supply wells are governed under OAR 690-200 through 235. Monitoring wells are 690-240, other holes 690-240, 0030, and geotech holes 690-240, 0035 through 49. In addition to the what standards apply, the administrative rule 690-200 0050 gives definitions. And this is, again, when trying to figure out what rules apply, is finding the definition of what you're looking for. So the Water Resource Commission uses definitions of the words listed below in the administration and enforcement of Oregon's groundwater law and the rules and regulations for the construction and alteration of wells. No other definition of the same words apply. So this is a very helpful starting place when wanting to know where in the rules to find an answer. We are going to be discussing rules as they pertain to well construction throughout this, but as an FYI, there are many circumstances that may result in a variation from the rules to achieve a well that protects the resource. This variance process is governed by what we call special standards, and the special standards are intended to be variations on our stipulated construction standards that offer the same or higher level of protection for the resource. And so this is really regarding site-specific conditions for new wells, repair to wells, abandonment of wells that can't meet the standards stipulated in rule, but a alternate method will provide a similar protection. So again, special standards are described in OAR 692.100.0021, and a request for special standards must include the start card number, the location of the well, name and address of the landowner, a diagram of the well design, and be signed by the licensed bonded well driller. And again, I just want everyone to be aware of this process. And if there is ever a question on a construction situation, it is by far a better idea to ask, does this require special standards, and get that approval prior to starting work, than looking at it in an after the fact situation where it may not be approved and that well is ultimately going to have a construction deficiency and will need to be repaired or abandoned. Another thing to keep in mind when we're talking about wells is, what is the use of the well going to be? So when you're working with a potential customer, this is something that's always a really good question to ask them. What are they planning to use the well for? And then you can give them generic information on, does that use require a water right? Do you need to contact the Water Resources Department before pursuing that use? So when we talk about groundwater use in the state of Oregon, there are many uses allowed from groundwater that do not require a water right. And those uses include stock watering, like filling troughs for horses or cows. You can water up to 1/2 an acre of non-commercial lawn and garden, up to 15,000 gallons a day for group or single domestic purposes, and up to 5,000 gallons a day for commercial purposes that do not include irrigation. Again, the most common issue our department has with people exceeding these allowed uses is the outside 1/2 acre lawn and garden watering for non-commercial purposes. So if your client is wanting to irrigate a large parcel that exceeds 1/2 an acre, or they're hoping to irrigate a commercial crop, this is where you can say that that's not allowed without a water right, and recommend that they contact the local water master or the water rights section in Salem. Again, this is just something to convey to the landowner and have a good understanding of these uses that are allowed without a water right, also known as exempt uses. I'm now going to talk about setbacks, and this is one of the most common construction deficiency scenarios that we encounter is a well that is not constructed in a location that meets these minimum setbacks for placements of water supply wells. So OAR 692.10.0030 stipulates the minimum setbacks for water supply wells, known as placement of water supply wells. So no person shall construct a water supply well within 50 feet of a septic tank, within 100 feet of a septic drain line, within 50 feet of a closed sewage or storm drain system, within 50 feet of a confined animal feeding lot, within 50 feet of an animal waste holding area, within 100 feet of a sewage lagoon or sewage disposal area, and within 5 feet of a permanent structure, eaves, or overhangs of a building. And so again, when we're looking at issues that commonly arise, the 100-foot setback to the nearest septic drain line is one of the most common construction issues we find, and often cannot be mitigated readily. So this is something to be very aware of, and I can't emphasize enough the 100-foot setback to a drain line. When contracting with a landowner, they need to be able to substantiate a septic map or expose those drain lines if there's any concern of the proximity of the drain line to the proposed well location. Additionally, when we talk about the 50-foot setback to a confined animal feeding area or holding area, again, that is not a pasture with grass or dirt as the substrate. This is a commercial animal feeding area or holding area that has a impermeable cover of the ground, cement slab, and you're having many animals there for a commercial feeding operation. So most of those areas are permitted with what's called a CAFO permit, confined animal feeding operation. Additionally, the 5-foot setback to permanent structures or roofs is a very common issue, and it really adversely affects that future of the well, of it being able to be repaired if needed to be, or if there's issues with the pump apparatus by building over them. It really interferes with that. So those are the real takeaways of that. And additionally, these setbacks are the generic requirements. But again, if there is a lot configuration that is very small or has other limitations, the agency is willing to allow deviations from these setbacks with a special standards approval. So again, if there's ever a concern the setbacks can't be met, please reach out to your local well inspector. We can set up a site visit to review the proposed well location and see if there's a site on the property that meets those setbacks, or work with the driller to approve a special standards that allows that lot to still be developed. Sealing requirements is the next slide, and there's two generic types of sealing requirements. 692.10, 130, and 140 describe sealing requirements in unconsolidated formations, and OAR 692.10, 150 describes sealing requirements in consolidated formations. So the primary purpose for the annular seal, as defined in our rules as the casing seal, is to protect the aquifer from contamination, waste, or loss of artesian pressure. This slide right here shows the consequence of a seal not extending to the proper depth and sealing off the shallow water bearing zone. This is known as commingling or cascading water, and is a major violation of well construction rules, and will cause the well to have to be repaired or permanently abandoned. This water, as you saw, is flowing continuously and is like a faucet being left on 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and adversely affects the water bearing zone that is being dewatered to the lower zone. So it can affect surrounding wells and ultimately damages the resource. These two slides are the tables that show the two generic types of well sealing. On the left, we have a diagram showing the sealing of wells into unconsolidated material. And that is an upper oversized drill hole, 4 inches greater in diameter than the nominal casing diameter of the casing, shall be constructed to a minimum depth of 18 feet. The diagram on the right is showing the consolidated formation diagram, and the seal must extend at least 5 feet into solid, unfractured consolidated rock overlying the water-bearing rock formation below a depth of 13 feet. There is an additional sealing requirement if you encounter artesian conditions. And artesian conditions are created when the recharge zone is at or above the land surface elevation of where the well is constructed. If you look at the diagram on the left, you can see the recharge zone in a hypothetical mountainous area, and then the wells drilled in the valley, encountering that same water elevation shown in that dotted line. The well on the middle, while it has artesian pressure, that does not exceed the land surface elevation, so it is not a flowing artesian well. And the well on the right, the water level is at or above the top of the wellhead and is flowing at the surface. So there are additional standards for artesian water supply wells, and they are water supply wells penetrating into artesian aquifer shall have an upper size drill hole at least 4 inches greater in diameter than the nominal casing diameter, and a watertight unperforated casing shall extend and be sealed at least 5 feet in a confining interval immediately overlying the artesian water bearing zone. In all cases, a minimum of 18 feet of casing and casing seal will be required. If cement grout is placed by a suitable method at the bottom of the casing, methods A, B, or D, the diameter of the upper size drill hole shall be at least 2 inches larger than the nominal diameter of the permanent well casing. And so again, if you're drilling a well that you find artesian conditions in that doesn't have a consolidated formation that is acting as that aquitard or impermeable layer, that there is the artesian zone below that, that's when special standards will be needed to allow that well to be constructed with a seal that doesn't extend 5 feet into the confining unit overlying the water bearing zone. This again can happen in basin sediments and depends on seasonality and recharge of those water bearing zones. So if you encounter a flowing artesian well in a situation where there is no confining unit, please reach out to your local well inspector immediately to go through this process and get special standards approval prior to pulling the rig off site. Additionally, in a flowing artesian situation, there are additional standards beyond the seal that include an artesian well cap. And so that cap must be threaded or welded so that no water can flow past it and completely stop all that water. And then also all flowing artesian wells shall be equipped with a pressure gauge placed on the dead end line, and a petcock valve shall be placed between the gauge and the well casing. After that's installed, all flowing artesian water supply wells should be tested for artesian shut-in pressure in pounds per square inch and rate of flow in cubic feet per second or gallons per minute under free discharge conditions. This data must be recorded on the well report. In these appendix and figure, you will see a diagram of both the seal requirements of an artesian well, 5 feet into that impermeable confining formation, overlying the artesian water bearing zone. And you will also see the requirements of the artesian well cap, specifically that pressure gauge placed on a dead end line with a petcock valve between the gauge and the well casing. Driven and jetted wells, construction standards are stipulated in OAR 690-210-0180, and all drive point wells or jetted wells shall have non-perforated watertight casing meeting the minimum specifications shown in table 210-1 and extend a minimum distance of 18 feet below land surface. An upper drill hole at least 4 inches greater in nominal diameter than the permanent casing shall extend at least 18 feet below land surface. The annular space shall be filled with grout. If temporary casing is used in construction, it must be removed during grout placement. So again, even though they're driven or jetted wells, they still have to have an oversized borehole and still have to meet our minimum standards for casing seal. Again, this example on the left is showing a sand point well, and it's just a graphical representation of a driven well. But to meet standards, there would have to be an oversized borehole and seal material. And the wells on the right are jetted well points for dewatering. And again, they are constructed in a manner where that oversized jetted hole is 4 inches larger in diameter than the permanent casing. As we're talking about casing, it's very important that you're familiar with where to find the specifications for casing and the casing joints. The OAR 690-210-0200 steel casing joints. All steel casing joints shall be welded or threaded, coupled, and shall be watertight. If welded casing joints are used, the weld shall be full penetrating weld at least equal in thickness to the wall thickness of the casing. Welded casing joints shall have a tensile strength equal or greater than that of the casing. And so as we're talking about welded casing joints, that is as much detail as the rules give on welding, but there are expectations in the exam setting that as a drilling professional, you are very familiar with welding and have the ability to answer questions that are not stipulated in a rule or statute. To that note, specific things to be familiar with are what happens when you are welding and have excessive heat or amperage, and understand that will cause crystallization to the casing. Another aspect of this exam that's not explicit in the rules is what is the purpose of a drive chute, and how is it constructed, etc. So you're going to need to understand that that drive chute protects the casing during driving operations, is larger in diameter than the casing, and is equipped with that hardened cutting edge to allow it to be driven. There are other situations like that throughout the exam. So while being familiar with the rules and where to find specific answers to questions in the rules is very important, there are also things that are going to test you on your understanding of other requirements to be a water well constructor. This slide is table 210-2 and gives a reference to the minimum specifications of steel casing as required by OAR 690, 210, 190. Again, the caveats here are looking at the lower large diameter casings. You see they have asterisks. Those casings are then limited to maximum depths if they are not greater in sidewall thickness than 0.25 quarter wall gauge casing. Plastic casing is used throughout the state in areas that have water quality issues that can cause corrosion to steel, and is allowed under rule OAR 690-210-0210. Plastic casing shall not be driven, and it may only be installed in an oversized borehole. Plastic casing may only be installed after drilling has been completed, and no drilling is allowed inside plastic casing. So again, that caveat right there, if a well has plastic casing, it can never be deepened or drilled out in any manner. So that's kind of the downfall of plastic casing, is that well can never be deepened. Requirements of the PVC casing is that it has to be type 1120 or 1220, STR 21 or 26, and meet those specs or be greater in sidewall thickness. And then again, when we're looking at plastic casing, there's also depth limitations on that casing. STR 21 has a maximum depth of 150 feet below land surface, and STR 26 cannot be installed any deeper than 100 feet below land surface. In addition, when using plastic casing, OAR 690-210-0210 stipulates it must be protected from physical and ultraviolet light. This can be done in two manners. One is if you want to use well casing as that protection for physical damage and ultraviolet light. And the requirements of using steel casing are that it's a minimum of 2 inches larger in diameter than the PVC casing used, and that casing shall extend at least 6 inches above the top of the plastic well casing and shall be sealed at least 4 feet into the ground within the annular seal. The alternate means of protecting plastic casing from ultraviolet light and physical damage is using a wellhead bunker. And the requirements of that bunker are that it's made of concrete, hard plastic, fiberglass, or wood, or another structurally sound material, and it protects that casing from both physical damage and ultraviolet light. That bunker must completely surround the well and be fitted with a lid and not interfere with access to the wellhead. And again, when using plastic casing, there's nothing that prevents pitless adapters from being used, but we recommend that they're not installed. And if they are, there needs to be extra care taken that the weight of the pump doesn't exceed the strength of the PVC or plastic casing. That completes part one of my presentation. Again, here's my contact information, and feel free to call, text, or email me anytime. Thank you.